The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. The pleasure of finding things out is the essence of scientific discovery. Physics is like sex. Sure, it may give some practical results, but that's not why we do it. What I cannot create, I do not understand. Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. You can know the name of a bird and all the languages of the world, but when you're finished, you'll know absolutely nothing about the bird. The joy of understanding is far greater than the joy of being right. I have approximate answers and possible beliefs, and different degrees of certainty about different things, but I'm not absolutely sure of anything. If you think you understand quantum mechanics, you don't understand quantum mechanics. The highest forms of understanding we can achieve are laughter and human compassion. I'm smart enough to know that I'm dumb. Nature uses only the longest threads to weave her patterns, so each small piece of her fabric reveals the organization of the entire tapestry. You have no responsibility to live up to what other people think you ought to accomplish. It is important to realize that in physics today, we have no knowledge of what energy is. We never are definitely right. We can only be sure we are wrong. The more you see how things are, the more you realize how crazy the world is. I believe that a scientist looking at non-scientific problems is just as dumb as the next guy. There is a difference between knowing the name of something and knowing something. Fall in love with some activity and do it. Nobody ever figures out what life is all about, and it doesn't matter. Study hard what interests you the most in the most undisciplined, irreverent, and original manner possible. Reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. Theoretical physics is a strange business. You have to understand the mathematics, but it's not just mathematics. You're not responsible for the world you're born into, but you are responsible for making it better. Science is a way of trying not to fool yourself. I'm always looking for something new, something I've never seen before. The imagination of nature is far greater than the imagination of man. Physics isn't the most important thing. Love is. For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations. We are at the very beginning of time for the human race. It is not unreasonable that we grapple with problems, but there are tens of thousands of years in the future. You have to keep an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out. Science is what we have learned about how not to fool ourselves about the way the world is. The only way to discover the limits of the possible is to go beyond them into the impossible. Everything is interesting if you go into it deeply enough. Double quotes. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. We are trying to prove ourselves wrong as quickly as possible, because only in that way can we find progress. You cannot understand anything unless you can explain it to a child. Physics teaches us not to be afraid of change, but to embrace the unknown. The universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. Experiment is the sole judge of scientific truth. We are driven by the excitement of finding that which no one has found before. To solve any problem, you must simplify it. I'd hate to die twice. It's so boring. When you're solving a problem, don't worry about but others think solve it in your way. The reward for doing science is the fun of discovery itself. The real problem in the world is how to get people to change their minds. A new evidence shows they're wrong. Scientific knowledge is a body of statements of varying degrees of certainty, some most unsure, some nearly sure, but none absolutely certain. All learning is ultimately a matter of self-discipline. We are an exploring, experimenting species. That's our nature. There is no learning without having to pose a question. And a question requires doubt. What do I care what other people think? To understand is to invent. Everything we know is only some kind of approximation, because we do not yet know all the laws. If you find science boring, then you're learning it from the wrong teacher. I don't know anything, but I do know that everything is interesting if you go into it deeply enough. Double quotes. The fun in science lies not in discovering the truth, but in discovering how little we know. It's not about the answers you have. It's about the questions you ask. The edge of knowledge is the most exciting place to be. If something disagrees with experiment, it's wrong. That's all there is to it. We are explorers, driven to know what's out there, but the more we discover, the more we realize how little we understand. You can't predict the future, but you can prepare for it. We must understand the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. The trick is not to fool others, but to avoid fooling yourself. Science is a way of thinking much more than it is a body of knowledge. Don't confuse knowing with understanding. You can know a lot about something and not really understand it. Nature has a great simplicity and therefore a great beauty. There are no miracle people, just people who understand the problem better. In order to progress, we must recognize our ignorance and leave room for doubt. There is always more to learn, even in failure. If you want to master something, teach it. We are limited only by the extent of our imagination. The most important thing is to not stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. I never ask if something is possible. I ask how it can be done. The real glory of science is that it teaches us to appreciate how little we know. Understanding is not only knowing the facts, but also seeing how they fit together. No problem is too small or too trivial if we can really do something about it. The real value of a scientific education is not in the facts learned, but in the mindset acquired. I can live with doubt and uncertainty. I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong.